Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're at in the world. I'm Ray Orsini, host of Partner First, and this is not a Partner First. It's actually an MSP Dispatch special report, starting off powerful. And in this series, we've done this already once with Alex Farling and Luis Girardo, where we covered mergers and acquisitions from the vendor perspective. Now we're doing it from the employee perspective. So I think that the music is good. Wins and losses better. I can't say I disagree, but that's a reminder. Every Tuesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, check out Jason Slagle, myself on wins and losses. But what we're here for, though, is a special report. How you doing, Dean?
Good. How are you?
Another beautiful day. I can't complain. Nothing, no data centers on fire today, so it's a win-win. I'll take it. We did have this planned ahead of time. And I'll just do the quick housekeeping. Unfortunately, we had to reschedule last time, but this time we're here. We're live. Dean threatened me. I was under duress to not reschedule this again. So you guys are safe. Once again, he's protecting everybody in the ecosystem. And for those that don't know, the last time we had this scheduled, Dean was working for an MSP that had been acquired twice. And now he's working for me. So I acquired Dean. I said, you don't acquire, I acquire. So and he's our director of client success. So I just want to put that out there because I'm absolutely biased 100%. Hey Keith, hey Glenn, I see Phil, Logan, Simon, Garrett in the chat. I appreciate you guys. Homie, as our resident chief chat specialist, you are entitled to all OIT shirts, in my opinion. Simon, make it happen. So, Dean, give us some background on you. What is this MSP thing you were doing for how many years, and why should we listen to you at all in the MSP ecosystem?
That's a fair question. So about 10 years ago, I was wrapping up a long overdue electrical engineering degree, and I needed some spending money. And I saw this company I was going to UMass Dartmouth. I saw this company that was nearby called ThinkTech Computers. And I thought, well, it's a computer store, they must do bench work and, solder boards and replace CD drives. So I applied for a job, very confident, and applied for a technical job. Went in, the owner interviewed me. I did not qualify for the technical job. But I had some sales experience, so he brought me on as an account manager. And a couple months into that, the entire tech team had gotten sick and tired of me yelling at them to do things like work tickets on time and in order. And the owner said, "You sound more like a service manager." And that's where my adventure started. And 10 years later, I'm here.
Nice, not bad at all. So it's funny because I've had more than a few people like you've heard me say this. I sit on advisory boards for colleges and high schools, and so we used to get a healthy round of interns and stuff and applicants coming in, and without fail, we'd get people would come in and say, in Cuba, I was working on electrical stuff. I'd be able to bring a motherboard back from life, especially based in Miami, back in our MSP days. Bring a motherboard back from life, and I know how to fix, replace capacitors, and I'm like, we don't do any of that anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? Excellent. As another engineer, excellent skills to have, just not relevant to the MSP world. So they saw you had some service leadership skills. They put you in the service manager role. How long were you doing that? Give us some scope. I know it's over X number of years, but how did that role go? What were you doing in that role?
So I was very lucky. The owner I was working for at that first MSP really invested in me from the beginning and teaching me the business, which I came to find over the years was rather atypical. But I was entitled the service manager of ThinkTech Computers for about 7 years, although a few years in I was effectively the general manager, and I suppose other than HR, there really wasn't any aspect of the business I wasn't running. But yes, that was about 7 years until we got acquired the first time. And then my role switched to an operations management role as we already had a service manager at the acquiring MSP, which is one of the things I could talk about today. And then we got acquired again. So it was pretty exciting.
Nice. So every MSP is different. You're heavily involved in the community. You're on Reddit. You're on Discord. You're pretty much everywhere. I actually can't just can't get rid of you. But in knowing this, you talk to other MSPs, you know they're different, right? We've had the dispatcher argument ad nauseum. Service manager may not be something some MSPs are used to.
Sure.
What is a service manager? What's the responsibilities?
Well, I think the first thing is to differentiate if you have a service manager who is technical or non-technical, and meaning a service manager who is responsible for doing tickets and typically billable work. And in my case, I was a non-technical service manager. While I certainly have technical knowledge, I was not responsible for doing billable work. And at a high level, the service manager is in charge of the profit and loss of the service department. So that can mean different things at different maturity organizations. At a fairly small MSP, that might just mean that you make sure customers are happy and don't leave. At a higher maturity MSP, you're going to be managing the individual business units that fall under your service department, your managed services, technical services, maybe even professional services. You're going to be managing agreement run rates, profitability of individual employees, and really steering that ship so that your ownership understands and knows where potential deficits are coming up, pitfalls. Can be things as simple as we've onboarded a new client. We've spent all this money on onboarding. Here's how many months of normal service we're going to have to run them at before we start actually generating a profit. But at a high level, that's all the stuff a service manager does.
So you're one of those crazy people that likes numbers and statistics and reporting and analytics. You're one of the odd ones, is basically what I'm hearing.
I hate math. That's why I was still in college at that point, because I had failed out once because of math and had to go back and was redoing math classes. So I wouldn't say more I learned to use as a necessity to run the department, because nobody wants to work for somebody that just manages on intangible feelings. And
so it's more of a, you did it because you needed it to, you got those skills because you needed to be good at your job, not because you have a passion for math. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yep.
Okay. I saw that Dean Unlimited code, Simon, and no, denied. So that's not happening. And the reason we don't do Elvis is because YouTube gets really gnarly about copyright stuff. I don't know. They're kind of dumb about that. So talk to me about this M&M thing that we're talking about, or M&A, or M&M&A, or M&A&A.
Sure.
Mergers and acquisitions. So your original company was how big before you guys got acquired the first time?
So my original company, we had at our peak size, which we had shrunk from before we were acquired, we were 14 full-time employees. And we had whittled that down a little bit before we got acquired. Just one of my bonus tips: make yourself attractive for acquisition. And our total revenue stream, around $2 million MSP at that point. We were in a tertiary market, so I would define a tertiary market as less than 500,000 year-round population, where we were on the east coast of Massachusetts, in a very sort of past its prime former seat of manufacturing and whaling. So not exactly the sexiest environment to be running a competitive MSP, which to this day is one of the things that I find very interesting about the first time we were acquired, because it's not where I would have picked an MSP if I were buying one.
So, and I want to get into that later, the how to make yourself attractive for M&A, because 2 million ARR, was that full ARR? Was that projects plus MRR plus?
That's a good question. Yeah, so that was total. We were pretty weak on the project side, so probably about like 1.5 of that was recurring.
It's not bad.
Combination of both services and recurring product and cloud white label.
Okay, so I didn't hear VoIP in there. No, I'm kidding. So okay, so 2 million in size, tertiary market. Are you saying tertiary market because it's my market is different thing? I'm trying to stem that. I'm trying to head off that question before it comes out in the chat.
Yes. So to be clear, I'm going to channel my inner Paul Dipple. No one's market is different. There's enough business to go around everywhere. Cut it out if you're saying that. All right? Because no one's market is different. That being said, different regions or areas of the country can sort of increase or decrease the difficulty factors of doing things. And I would often tease the owner of our MSP that we were playing MSP on hard mode. We were playing Super Contra with a bad controller, none of the Konami codes, one eye blindfolded, and only half a monitor. It's definitely a little bit more challenging, but that's not an excuse. You're muted.
I have to be at least once per
Yes,
episode.
at least once.
But it's okay because you had OIT VIOP and I changed it just now in your title. So, all right. So no market is different. I couldn't agree any more than I did. Like, absolutely. Making yourself attractive though. So that $2 million MSP to you, that would not have been something you'd pick up on. To me, that seems a little small anyway for M&A. Not compared by today's standards. Today's standards freaking insane. How do you make yourself attractive? Keith seems to think it's with makeup. Danny says he doesn't need makeup. I'm assuming makeup's not really a requirement here for being attractive as an MSP.
Well, that's actually an interesting thing to talk about a little bit because I know we're being facetious, but yeah, makeup can be a little bit important depending on what your buyer's value proposition is. And you think to like any of the MSPs that are watching this, it's possible you've had a prospect before that's looked at how you present yourself, either what your office looks like, how you're dressed, the tablet you're carrying, brand of pen, whatever. And they have made a judgment about that. And people do make judgments, despite that we teach children don't judge a book by its cover. We all do it all the time. And a little lipstick on the pig isn't the worst thing in the world. And especially where we were coming from an environment where most of our clients at ThinkTech were what we would call blue collar, service-based industries. My average client at that time would have been wearing probably a work shirt that had their name, embroidered on there. And we reflected the types of clients we serviced. And the first MSP that acquired us, had offices in Midtown Manhattan, right off, Fifth Avenue, offices in Stamford, Connecticut, in the nice part. And so right away, that's a potential mismatch. And one of the first failure points that they can kind of go into sort of the way that you approach that makeup on the outside of your company and how you present that value proposition to your clients.
So how do you... Okay, so Keith said that not in relation to what you just said, but strangely apropos to the topic we're talking about. MSP A that does business a certain kind of way gets acquired by MSP B that is very polished, very out there, very, like you said, Manhattan offices. This is upper echelon MSP, I would imagine. How the hell did those two collide? How did... You know what I'm saying? How did the vegan say that steak looks good? How did that happen? Or in this case, maybe the steak eater saying that salad looks good.
It's a good question because there's the internal part too, and which I can talk about in a minute. That our MSP was much more high maturity level internally, so there was a mismatch there as well. And I think a large part of it was both owners recognized early on that if they didn't have a similar mission, vision, and culture, it doesn't work. And that's kind of the first observation I made from all of the acquisitions. We did a few acquisitions at ThinkTech. We picked up a couple really small, like 1- and 2-man shops as well. Yeah. And every time
acquisitions, or those like acqui-hire, assuming the contract kind of things.
Exactly, acqui-hire, buy a book of business, convert any existing clients over to our book of business. I tried keeping a couple of employees for a while. It wasn't a great fit, but. Give it a shot.
That's very different from a traditional M&A where you're joining the two together so that you can have a greater whole. This is just you have a nice book of business and somebody probably wants out at some case or tired of being an owner. Yeah, exactly. Very different things. We're talking about the latter. We're talking about a lot of money comes in, wants to buy a mature MSP, keep it on for the whole, keep everybody on, mostly, do that kind of thing.
Yeah, and so that having that similar sort of a culture philosophy is very important, and it can kind of break down a little further from that. It's not just because when we say culture, we're talking about are there Nerf guns at the office? Do people have Well, we did it too. Do people have like like the tech bar, like that
Yeah.
you host? Like, is there literally a tech bar? Do folks like hang out? But culture means more than just that. There's your core values. There's sort of the culture around your support cadence, because we could all support our clients exactly the same. We could all have the exact same model, but interpret it and deliver it in a slightly different way. There's sort of the culture of the work. Like our office at ThinkTech, we were very in office heavy in terms of culture. Our team naturally wanted to be present in the building. We really didn't have a lot of folks that even wanted to work remotely, versus the company that first acquired us. I would say about 30% of their staff weren't even in the same country. They were dispersed all around the world. And if you don't identify the culture similarities and the culture mismatches early on and sort of work to address them, and address doesn't mean necessarily fix, but just address them, you probably won't have a successful merger. And our first merger went so well because both owners identified those cultural similarities and those cultural differences, and they addressed them first with the entire both companies before they really addressed anything else.
So that answers Keith's point of, you have basically apples and oranges, but you guys were still able to make it create some beautiful drink. I don't know. You said tech bar. My mind goes to drinks. But you guys made it work. So it sounds like even in a good merger, even if the cultures are different, you can still come to a sustainable, successful outcome. It just
Yep,
takes a little more work.
absolutely. And I think it takes some acknowledgement of really setting what your goals are with the merger right up front. And
Mhm.
one of the things that went really well with our first merger is the new ownership really didn't play any games around that. The day that it was announced to the staff, their leadership team was in our office, which was a hike for them.
Mhm.
And that showed us they cared. It showed us they were willing to be present. It showed us that they were taking this seriously, because up until that point, I mean, they could have just been buying a company to add to their portfolio. But we had the entire executive team there, and they started off, very first thing that they said is everybody has a job. And that sounds like a relatively trivial thing, because if you're buying a healthy company, of course you're buying it because you want to continue running a healthy company. But the individual employee isn't thinking like a business owner, they're thinking like an employee, and they're panicking because as far as they know, their whole world is tearing down. And so both owners
How important
recognize.
was that for the owners to come in and say everybody's safe, like from minute one, like from very early days? Because there's anxiety, right? Like there's
Yes,
got to be anxiety when this stuff happens. Um, can you give us some of the, obviously, we want to be sensitive, we don't want to share too much information,
sure.
but from a high level, can you tell me when the first acquisition was announced, did the staff already have an idea that it was coming, or was it a surprise? How did they take it? Because that's always been my concern, right? Like, we've done some
Right.
M&As, and I'm always concerned with how the other team's going to take it.
So the only staff that knew ahead of time, so I had known for a few months, and then our finance admin had known for a couple weeks before the announcement was made, because somebody's got to get the books ready. Otherwise, it was really a surprise to everybody. Um, in the words of some of my staff, we knew something was up, because it was, because we had such an in-office culture. It was very atypical for me and the owner to both leave if we weren't going somewhere where there was a ticket. Everything had a ticket, and the fact that we were basically disappearing to go sit in his car and talk at the beach about this acquisition. They picked up on something was happening. I don't know that they necessarily knew that it would be an acquisition. But when they found out, it's scary, because you have something you're used to and something you're comfortable with, and you've got no ownership in this decision. It's not everybody's decision, and there's a common bias that you tend to see amongst humans, but especially with visionary folks who tend to be entrepreneurs. They assume that everybody who works for them tends to share their same modality of being a visionary, thinking about what could be. And most of us, we're not visionaries. That's why we work for you. And we're not thinking that way. We're thinking about what is, and what is just changed. And I didn't get a say in it. And what does this mean for me? And that can be really scary. And in our first acquisition, both owners did just a fantastic job qualifying that from day one. of exactly, here's what's happening, here's why it's happening, here's what it means for you, here's what's going to happen tomorrow, here's what's going to happen a week from now, here's what's going to happen 6 months from now, and beyond that, we're not sure. And as a result, 100% of the staff from my company stayed on.
That's pretty amazing. That is rare in the M&A space. Especially we're used to, like, on the vendor side, especially, nothing's going to change, everybody's going to stay on, and then Rod Ray and Ryan Weeks disappear from the company, disappear from the public for 6 months, and then end up somewhere else. And that's happened a million times. That's not specific to Kaseya stuff. That's just the way M&A goes. But I wonder, were these, because staff overlap is a big deal, like he's calling out, right? And if you have two directors of client success, you know it's scary, you got this two Spider-Men pointing at each other thing. I take it MSPB looked at that, took that into account before finalizing things, before walking in the door and saying everybody's job is safe. Like,
so interestingly enough, I was the one who fell into that category. So obviously, if you're buying a functional MSP, you need support staff. Absolutely. Whether you absorb them or eventually replace them, you do need support staff. So superficially, the support staff are safe. So then you look at the other side of the business. Well, you need people to sell stuff. And if you have somebody who's already good at selling stuff, probably don't want to get rid of them. So that's safe. So then you're left with admin folks like me and our finance person. Our finance person was really lucky that the company that had bought us was growing their finance department, and they literally needed someone in that role who was super experienced with QuickBooks, ConnectWise, all those integrations. So worked out perfectly for her. I was screwed. And I said this to my boss at the time when he first told me about it. I'm like, well, they already have a service manager. Literally, they already have a service manager, Nate. They don't need two.
Ouch. So even, like, to me, okay, I like to be optimistic, but I'm pragmatically optimistic.
Right.
If I have the same job as somebody else, even if somebody walks in that I don't know and I don't have a relationship, says everybody's safe, I'm still a little worried. Did you have any of those staff that were still a little concerned even after hearing the message?
They were. They absolutely were. There was a couple of staff that they played Among Us a lot then. So like, this is sus. This is sus. What they're saying is sus. And yeah, there was a little bit of that. What helped is, first of all, me. I didn't know what was going to happen with me, and I was very clear with them. I'm like, listen, they already have a service manager. I'm hoping they'll allow me to contribute, but they might not, at which point I might go away. But until then, I'm here. And the owner of the company had made a commitment that he was going to stay on for the first year, at the very least, to help, transition clients and anything. And so I think that all made everybody feel like, well, the ownership isn't just running away. The leadership isn't just leaving us. They're not just abandoning us. Let's give this a shot. But we sweetened the pot. We added a carrot. So both of the owners recognized the fact that we were a pretty high maturity, close-knit, smaller MSP that had a very, very, very refined way we did what we did that was different from the way the acquiring MSP did things. And they wanted to make sure that we didn't lose that before everybody had a chance to learn from it. So they did retention bonuses. And I think that was really smart, because they came in right on the first day. Everybody here is going to get a retention bonus if you stay on for at least 6 months. And that was cash. That was just here's the dollar value. It wasn't a mystery. It wasn't, we'll tell you what it'll be later. You get this, you get this, you get this right away. Here's your piece of paper you're going to sign that basically guarantees you are here for 6 months. You get this check. Okay. That was a really helpful carrot over those first 6 months. Anytime anybody on the team was feeling a little bit, questioning, frustrated, concerned, like, well, hold on a minute. Let's see what's going to happen. And don't forget, if we make it to that 6 months mark, you're going to get that nice retention bonus. It was very smart to identify that objection.
Okay. So, and do you think that was because so MSPB, were they as operationally mature? I know you said they had higher polish. They definitely had a better presentation. In the world of Dustin, that includes dress jeans and and he says shirts with sleeves, but you and I have both seen him in tank tops with those ostrich boots. So, but did they have the same operational maturity did you did, or because I'm wondering, you keep describing your original MSP ThinkTech as being very operationally mature, and I could see how that could be a bonus for the acquiring company, right? They could say, well, these people have stuff that they're solving that we're not, and that could be a good thing for them. So I'm wondering where they stood in comparison to the original MSP.
So it's operational maturity is a lot like intelligence. It's very hard to explain it to somebody that doesn't know they don't have it, that they don't have it, because you run the risk of insulting them and also glossing over the things that they are doing a good job with. So if I were to totally channel Paul Dipple, SLI style of thinking, ThinkTech was probably like an OML 4.2 at about the time we were acquired, and the company that had acquired us was probably like an OML 2.4 at most, which is a pretty big difference in operational maturity. But there were also some differences. They were a much bigger MSP. They were actually doing true 24/7 support. They had a full in-house NOC. We were outsourcing hours. So it's challenging when you come into a company like that and you can immediately tell that, oh wow, like their revenue business units are just blended. All of their revenue business units are blended. There's no real separation of different types of COGS as it goes back to profitability, and they're not tracking any of that. They didn't, and for me, in the first like 2 weeks, I was like, wow, these guys have no idea if they're profitable or not. They aggregate, they knew they were profitable. They were making money, but like they couldn't say to me like, hey, that employee Ray, he's a profitable employee. They had no way of tracking that, and they didn't know they had no way of tracking that. They didn't even know that they weren't doing that, and so it was very interesting to see there were elements of high maturity that we placed a lot of value on that they didn't care about because they didn't know they should care about. And there were other elements of high maturity that we didn't care about because we figured everyone does this, that they were super interested in learning from. And we were lucky that they were at least open to, and that's why I don't think they fired me instantly. They were open to being told, and thank you, any of you who are watching. They were very open to being told where they were not as mature as they could be by Dean.
That's a big deal, because when you're the acquiring party, you have the power, right? You're
Yep.
typically the bigger entity, right? If this is not a acqui-hire or whatever, like we were talking about the small ones, you're the bigger entity. You have the money. Obviously, you grew to a place where you could afford to buy the next one. So it's interesting to hear, despite being the bigger player, at least financially, to say we're still open to where we're missing stuff. We're still open to where we could improve, and we genuinely want to improve those things. That's a big deal. And I got to be honest, we don't get a lot of inside baseball, and most, at least I can't speak publicly about the inside baseball stuff. I know about the M&As that I'm aware of, but that is not a normal thing. Did that, now having talked to MSPs, now looking in retrospective, hindsight, was that a normal thing as compared to other MSPs you've talked to that have gone through similar? Or, because I get at the time it could just be, this is business as usual. It's the way it's supposed to go. But
no, we were incredibly fortunate. I knew that from the beginning, because my expectation was that they would meet with me probably at the first 3 months, like after the initial sort of integration, and they would have a polite conversation of, hey, thank you, but we don't need you and we don't really care about your ideas. That was what I was expecting. And that didn't happen. That didn't happen at all. In fact, the opposite of that happened. And it wasn't just with me. They approached everything that way. Even things that I think we would all agree objectively they were doing better than us. Their sales engine was much more robust than ours. They still came back and said, well, tell us how you're selling. Why are you selling that way? What piece of that worked well for you? And the result of having that kind of synergy was, in that first year, we increased, if ThinkTech were still a separate entity, we increased the value of ThinkTech by like $4 million.
Wow.
And a lot of it was money that was there that we could have asked for ahead of time, but we were too dumb to go ask for it. And they came in, they're like, listen, stupid, like you got all this money on the table, you're doing all these great things and you're not asking to be paid for it. Go ask. And we asked, and our clients, for the most part, were like, sure.
So, despite you guys having better maturity in terms of understanding financials, understanding the cost and the revenue centers, understanding attribution, the bigger MSP comes in and they knew how to squeeze the lemon a little better. They knew how to go in and get. Is that what I'm hearing? I'm trying to distill it down.
They were less fearful. There was less of a red line for them, being that they were larger. They were doing some other things as well, other revenue streams in their business that were really cool. That they did a lot with Haas, I've talked about online before, and nailed it. And that allowed them some freedom to be a little more comfortable with the fact that if we raise some prices here, add some services here, or a little more forceful with some services than ThinkTech was being, yeah, maybe someone will say no, but that's okay. Let's basically trim off some bad branches for some new and better growth. And what astounded me, it aggravated me a little bit, but what really astounded me was very few branches got cut. Even people that I was certain in my service manager bones would tell us to pound sand. They're like, all right, we'll pay for that. That's fair. We like that. And it was amazing. It was amazing to see once that little bit of fear was removed and there was a little bit more of that vision for what could be. I mean, the ROI they got on buying us was.
So I want to know, looking back, we talked about the making yourself presentable, making yourself look good for acquisition.
Yeah.
A high bottom line. I wonder now if you guys had pulled in that additional $4 million in revenue, considering you were $2 million AR to begin with, would ThinkTech, I know we're guessing here, but would ThinkTech have still considered being acquired if that was the case? If we know we're now bumping it up triple to $6 million?
Considered being acquired, yes. I don't think that we would have been acquired.
Yeah. And that's a lot of money. So I'm the first to say, and you and I have echoed this a million times over, MSPs create their own challenges. They create their own obstacles. They create their own no's, despite just asking the client. It's not that hard. Scary, yes. Hard, no. So if we're talking to these MSPs, we want to teach them to be prepared. We want to teach them to look better. We want to teach them to say, hey, we can squeeze that lemon a little better, get some more revenue out of it. What were some of the lessons you learned post-acquisition that you should be applied universally?
Sure. Some of them are pretty simple. One of them, and this is going to sound really trivial, but have assignable MSAs. Have your MSAs basically say that if somebody buys the client or somebody buys the MSP, we don't need new ink for that contract to still hold water if everybody's cool with that. I know that sounds like, well, yeah, of course, but that really gave the MSP that acquired us some room to approach our clients at a more calculated pace, because there wasn't we've just bought this MSP and now all their contracts are invalid, that revenue is not protected, we have to force them to sign a new MSA. They have to do anything. They could wait until, and since at ThinkTech a lot of our agreements are 3-year agreements, they could just wait until those agreements ended if they wanted to. And so when they would come in to do agreement refreshes, typically for an increase, the clients also didn't have to say yes to that. So that also caused us to have to demonstrate the value of why they want to say yes, but you took some of that pressure off by having that assignable MSA. So that's a big one.
Okay. What else? I mean, that's a huge one. And most MSPs don't think about that. And I hate to say it, Dustin's not wrong. We're never selling blah, blah. You don't know what you're doing in 10 years or 20 years. And just like MSP, if you ask an MSP, should you have email phishing training? Should you have email phishing filtering? Should you have spam filtering? Should you have AV? Should you have whatever? The answer is universally yes. But even if you've never had a ransomware event, even if you've never had a breach, doesn't frickin' matter. You do these things to prepare. And also Dustin's MSP is a handshake. Dustin's market's different. He's in Texas. No, it's not really different. He's being facetious. But what do you say to that? To those MSPs, they're like, no, we do handshake agreements. We're all month to month, no contracts. I'm never selling. I mean, you're the guy that has no problem with hard truths. What's your response to that if we're having that conversation at a bar at ITNC or something?
Yeah, I think that there's a commonly said thing in our industry, right? Where in small businesses in general, where you're either running a lifestyle business or you're not. And we tend to use that as sort of an insult, but we also allow folks to use that as a get out of jail free card. That, well, it's a lifestyle business, so I don't care about any of that. That may or may not be true, but first of all, you never know who's going to knock on your door with an offer you can't refuse. You also never know what's going to happen to you. And in the case of ThinkTech, the owner of the company, he wasn't old. He, wasn't in a cash-strapped situation. He just got to a point one day where he was like, I like solving business problems. I don't like running a business anymore, and I kind of don't want to run a business anymore, but I don't want to destroy what I built. And it wasn't that I need to sell to make a ton of money. Same thing happened with their second acquisition. The ownership wasn't looking to exit the MSP space. They were just, we haven't really spent a lot of time with our kids. Our kids are getting older. We haven't traveled in a while. It would be nice to have some freedom to do these things and not worry about our company. Oh, look at that. Another company's come in that matches our value system, that wants to buy us. So you can kind of get surprised. You don't have to be sitting there with an exit plan. And if you've taken some basic steps to make your business attractive for acquisition, protecting your revenue with contracts, so there's actually something there. Having separate scope of work from your actual MSA, having an up-to-date MSA, having a standardized stack. Let me tell you, we standardized. We had a lot of ubiquity. We standardized on. You can laugh. People can laugh at that. The reason Unify, but it made it easier because now new MSP doesn't have to train their staff on 50 different solutions. Everything at ThinkTech was set up exactly the same everywhere you go. So whether they wanted to keep what we were doing or not, and some of the stuff they ripped out, they brought in Palo, they brought in Cisco. That was easy.
Big boy firewall.
Yeah. and it got to the point where their director of technology could go to one of our client sites and have a general level of comfort that, okay, you guys are going to have a ThinkTech firewall, a ThinkTech switch stack, a ThinkTech security solution, a ThinkTech server. And it's all going to be set up in a way where I can kind of have a certain expectation in my head. We didn't have a bunch of weird crap it was one or two old contracts, but for the most part, we got rid of all the old weird crap and one-offs and exceptions. We had a clean chart of accounts, no weird stuff going on with the money that we couldn't explain. A lot of this is really basic, but it's that stuff you don't bother dealing with because it's like the plumber has the leakiest pipes at home. Like, I'll get to it next week. We had all that stuff already cleaned up. There was a playbook for how to run a client at our MSP. The company that acquired us didn't end up using all of that playbook, but it existed. So if I got hit by a bus in the first months of the acquisition, they knew how to run the place. All those things made it a lot easier for them to look at us as an investment, figure out what kind of work and money do we have to put in to get the ROI we want, and then execute on that, which is exactly what they did, increase their own valuation, and then they got acquired by a bigger company. And I would be pretty confident in saying, had they not been able to do that with us, they would not have been as well positioned when we got acquired the second time. So there's layers.
There's layers. And so there was a comment here from Dustin. I was about to rail on it. I was about to say, what do you mean? I don't care if you have no plans to sell. We were just talking about, and then he says, yeah, it does make the bottom line look better. Which I agree. It's not a matter of if you're going to do it, it's being prepared so you have the option, right? I was going to say hurricane preparation, but living in Florida, our hurricane preparation is going to Costco and getting alcohol and chips. So maybe not the best example, but it still holds true. Being prepared for whatever's coming. And then going back to the comments we were talking about, just that 4 million ARR, the 4 million additional revenue. Yeah, most of the objections are self-inflicted. Most of the pain is self-inflicted. Don't get me wrong. You want to learn your clients. You want to learn what's important to them, where their lines are, what they are willing to do, what they're not willing to do, especially if you're doing VCIO and they're doing whatever account management. As a highly mature MSP operationally, how did that feel when you're like, because you had to feel like you had a good handle on your clients, and then somebody comes in and be like, hey, dummy, we just tripled tripled the revenue.
So in my case, for our existing clients, I was a little bit frustrated. The owner of ThinkTech was, every owner has their different sort of like levers. He was always really worried about shaking the tree so much that he would no longer be able to employ somebody and support a family he was supporting. So that was a red line for him. And so there would be times where I would come to him, after one of these conferences and be like, man, we gotta start doing managed EDR. We have to. And it would be hesitation for a while of, I don't know how to sell it, I don't want to upset anybody. And this new MSP didn't have those fears. So that was a little frustrating because I was like, well, we could have done this all along. But on the flip side, there were entire lines of business that I told our old owner not to sell into. And a great example of that is nonprofit. I could never figure out how to make our model work for nonprofit. So I said, stop it. The MSP that bought us, a huge amount of their revenue came from nonprofit, and they managed it amazingly well. And for me, I was like, what do you mean this is profitable? What do you mean these folks would be happy and will buy equipment and we don't have to do grant writing? Like, what? I had never seen that before. So there's that element as well where you realize how much you weren't seeing the forest through the trees about things that you held dear to yourself as core principles.
So how much of that? Okay, so I want to be productive for our MSPs. I don't just want to say, hey, you're stupid, you're making your own problems. Yeah. What was the magic sauce? Yes, not being scared to hear a no. I imagine if you're a bigger MSP, you have more money in the bank, it's okay to be, if you lose a client, you lose a client. When you're smaller, it can hurt, right? Like our goal at OIT has always been, I don't want any subset of clients to be able to materially affect our bottom line. I don't want anybody in that position of power. As an MSP, I did the same thing. If I brought on 20,000 MRR, I was busting my ass to go find a bunch of smaller ones to also equal 20K MRR. So I wouldn't hurt it would hurt, but I wouldn't die if that, I lost that money. But in closing these deals that you didn't think the clients would accept, you said you couldn't figure out a way to make this stuff profitable with nonprofits, and this new company did. Can you share some of those secrets? Like, how were they? What was the approach? Because sales, let's be honest, most MSPs, they cry when talking about sales. Except Dustin, he loves sales. What was that secret sauce? Like, what was the approach?
Two parts. Scale, which
okay,
you kind of don't have until you have it, but scale, and then referrals. The manner in which the company that first acquired us really went the extra mile to build a sense of community amongst their clients and to consistently ask for warm, targeted referrals and also send back the information of how those referrals help them. It was so dialed in that their sort of like traditional marketing and SEO was almost non-existent. And so because, as I said at the very beginning, because both owners recognized that they had similar core values, that slotted in perfectly to how we were treating our clients. It was very easy to come back and be like, listen, you've been our client for a decade, 15 years, 18 years. You know us, you trust us. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we're going to bring to you. This is how we're going to use scale to bring down your costs and give you some things you didn't have before. But it's also going to increase your costs in this other area. Maybe we're changing more things to an OpEx instead of a CapEx with like HOS, because we could do that at scale. And that whole thing kind of came together of then let's stretch that whole conversation over 3 to 6 months, not 2 weeks, not 3, but knowing that the sales team was disciplined enough to actually follow up on these things, not let them go cold, not let them die, set a firm expectation that this is what's going to happen if you don't agree or don't say yes, but not an ultimatum. Don't drive anybody out. There's no real aggression. It was just a very sort of firm, confident, warm hug type of a way of delivering things. And it worked really, really well for both of our companies. Probably wouldn't have worked for 2 other different MSPs that exact same way, which is why it's so important to identify that culture and that support culture up front and make sure that there's good alignment and synergy.
So it's this we hear a lot, right? We've heard over and over again, sell on value, sell on business impact.
It is focused on value, Keith.
Well, the reason I bring it up is because I'll be honest. So I, as an MSP, I absolutely did the chart tech thing, the true methods thing. Ton of coaching, C-level, ton of coaching, ton of that stuff. Had separate business coaches. I still have business coaches to this day. I've had them for all of my businesses. I'm a firm believer in that. But I'm also a firm believer in the old Reagan saying, trust but verify. And when it comes to stuff like this, when it comes to sales, I found it was just easier to throw spaghetti at a wall. Try this process, see if it works. If it doesn't, adjust, move on to the next. And you can do that with price, cost, value, business impact, so on and so forth. Because at the end of the day, if I know how to sell based on a user story, but you don't know how to sell based on a user story, you're not going to be able to do it my way.
Right.
You got to see what works for you, right? Do you think that their salespeople were maybe more adept at that? Did the think tech salespeople kind of learn that, or how did that work?
So what's funny about that is, our primary new contract salesperson at ThinkTech was the owner, and when we were acquired, he stayed on as the primary salesperson for all those accounts. He's technically the one that converted them all using the process and methodology of the new company. So we didn't have to, in that case, use their salespeople to actually have the face-to-face engagement because the trust was already there with our team. But it was removing some fear and just being able to offer things in a different way. Because it is true, if we can reduce our cost on things due to scale, we can get a lot more creative with how we pitch the value back to the client. So like if I have a relationship where I'm buying, I'm making up a number here, but if I'm buying, let's say 10,000 units of Dell, every 6 months, that puts me in a different category than somebody who's only buying 300. And not just from what I can ask from Dell, but also I could buy all of those at once and keep them somewhere and then sell out of that inventory, which I would normally tell a normal small MSP, don't do that. That would be a mistake.
But that goes back to that chicken and egg problem, right? We talked about scale, but you can only do these things at scale. This is another one of those things. That's tough. Maybe the answer might be, and this is kind of where I lean, different size MSPs have salespeople that kind of know how to sell to that market. Bigger MSPs have it, salespeople. We've had this conversation. Selling to enterprise, selling to 1,000-person MSP, selling to, is very different from selling to a 10-person MSP or a lifestyle owner MSP. Very different values. Were your client bases similar?
Not even slightly. And so where that affected us, so we were, ThinkTech was a big sofa shop, and I'm happy to talk anyone's ear off after the call. Well, you're stupid if you're not doing full stack sofas. They don't pay me anything, but I'm happy to shell for them. So the director of technology of the company that bought us said to me, well, where are they ranked in a Gartner quadrant? And I looked at him, I'm like, who gives a shit? Like, my clients don't care about that. What the hell kind of ass thing is that to say? And he looked me square in the eye and he said, the types of clients that we're looking to pick up likely have a CISO on their staff, even if it's fractional. They're going to ask me that question. I had never been asked that question. I'd never had a client ask me that, but no one in southeastern Massachusetts is asking that question. Their clients were. And that tells you right there that while, sofas still work just fine at their clients. Get a little ribbon there if Steve's watching the call. But his point is valid. Their target customer profile was a company of sufficient size where there was either a full-time or fractional CISO, and that was usually one of their qualifying questions. And so they had Palo Alto in their offering because it ranked where it needed to rank for somebody to go rubber stamp the deal. And I'd never experienced that before. So
that's weird to me. I mean, it makes sense, but it's just odd to me that you were more mature service-wise. They had more mature client size. I would qualify it as that. Definitely larger. The thing that kills me here is because I've often said persistence will beat ingenuity 100% of the time. My dad used to have this thing, the world is full of, brilliant people that come up with inventions that don't go anywhere. It's the persistent people that actually, have success, and persistence is one of our own core values. Although Dustin did say, if you have to say your core value out loud, but separate from that, it's weird to me. You know what I mean? Like, why big MSP, tons of money, doing really well, able to acquire a $2 million AR company that's operationally good, and they didn't have to be, yet they still achieved that size. How do you balance that
Well,
juxtaposition?
you ready for the rub? So the second company that bought us, who I talked a little less about because I was just less involved with that merger. Once again, fantastic group of people. They did the same thing. They identify based on culture, on all of that. I was horrified at their operational maturity. It was even worse, and it didn't matter. And that was probably the biggest kick in the gut for me in my entire career as somebody who's been so focused on operational excellence and maturity, everything at a process. Just every one of my staff members could probably step into my job and read from the playbook level of process. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. And that operational maturity is definitely going to stabilize you in the long haul after the acquisition, but it don't have nothing to do with how much money you can make and how powerful you can be. So the company that ended up buying us the second time, they a couple of years ago were a big but relatively modest local MSP that one day said, you know what, we want to start buying people, and so they did. And it didn't matter that they weren't super high operational maturity. It'll matter someday, but it didn't matter now. And boy, does that kind of suck.
It does kind of suck. Dude, you know what also kind of sucked? We didn't even get to the second merger, the second acquisition, and it's already 156. Like, this has flown by. I think the only other webinar I've had that have gone like that quickly, that's not true. One, Heather Johnson from Gozinta, we talked about we talked about culture, lifestyle, and taking care of employees, and that flew. And then, I hate to say this, my fifth wall partner first, because I thought insurance was going to suck to talk about, and those were great with Reed, not Dustin, but they were still great.
Well, that's fine because you had the actual talent.
I had the talent. That's
Yes,
what it was.
yes.
But dude, we're gonna have to do this a second time just to talk about that second merger and the lessons learned there. But for now, thank you so much. I'll put your contact information up. It'll be in the show notes below. Dean's not kidding. He loves talking to MSPs about service delivery, and that's one of the reasons I brought him in is actions in the community and always being able to share. Dean, any final thoughts you want to share with our audience before we let him go?
You know what? I'm holding the mug up. I'll do a quick plug. So this is the second company that bought us. They're still growing. They are. If you got to get bought by a PE-backed MSP group, Omega Systems, they were amazing people, really good humans. I would, if you're looking to sell, I would go talk to them.
Not bad at all. Not all PEs are horrible. That's not a bad thing to hear. With that said, let's see what we have coming up. We have. Let's see here. We got Pitch It was yesterday, 7:25, as well as wins and losses. This is the special report. We will also have tomorrow MSP Pitch It Vendor Spotlight, the ConnectWise Pitch It Vendor Spotlight, featuring DefenseX and MSP Camp. And then tomorrow night, we have the Tech Bar Podcast, episode 62, featuring John Harden of Avik, the literal nicest guy in the entire ecosystem. We have stuff where he was shot in the face with a Nerf gun, and he still absolutely was smiling about it. Absolutely insane. And then on Friday, as always, Tuesdays and Fridays, we have MSP Dispatch presented by the MSP Media Network. That is Tony and myself. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being part of this. We'd love to see you continue the conversation on our Discord. The link is below, and I'll put the QR code up on the screen real quick if anybody wants to join us. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.